So before we get into today's lesson, I want you to go ahead and try the warm-up. It's just basically reviewing how to put square roots in your calculator. So the first one, once I get all my stuff set up here, because 49 is a perfect square, we know that the square root will be 7. Because the negative was outside the square root symbol, that negative is going to come along with the 7. Square root of 200, when you plug it in the calculator, you get 14.1. We typically round to the tens place or one number past the decimal point, unless you're specifically told to do otherwise. And the square root of 121, again, a perfect square. So you can get the square root of, not the square root, you're going to get 11. So far we know how to use factoring to solve polynomial equations. There are actually 3 other methods which you can solve polynomial equations other than factoring. Actually, there's 5 if we count graphing. But anyway, today we're going to look at how to solve polynomial equations or quadratic equations using square roots and using the square root method. It is traditionally a 2-day lesson, but it does tend to be on the shorter side of a 2-day lesson. But anyway, off we go. So this first slide is basically just going over the properties that if x squared equals some number, if the number we started with is larger than 0, we're going to get 2 positive answers. Okay, so if if x squared equaled 4, you're going to get 2 answers, positive, negative 2. If d equals 0, the square root of 0 is just 0. And if d is smaller than 0, that would mean it's a negative number. And we cannot take the square root of a negative, which means there are no solutions, or no real solutions technically, because we could get into imaginary, which we're not doing this year. So looking at the first problem, in order to solve a polynomial, to go ahead and solve this, we're actually going to divide each side by 2, because we want to get that x squared by itself. And that's going to give us x squared equaling 4. I'm going to square root each side. Because 4 is larger than 0, we're getting 2 answers, which would be positive, negative 2. Usually I don't make you check the square root equations. You certainly can. You would just plug positive 2 in and negative 2 in and make sure that you get 8 on each side. Here's 2 for you to try. And go ahead and try them, see what you come up with, and then we'll go over them together. So in the first one, I'm going to add positive 18 to each side. When I do that, I get m squared equaling 0. I square root each side, m equals 0. Just one answer because the square root of 0 is 0. Down here on number 4, I'm going to add negative 12 to each side. And we end up with b squared equaling negative 7. We cannot take the square root of a negative. So since we got negative 7, our answer is going to be no solution. And that's as far as you can go. As long as you get down to the point where you see that the square root would be the square root of a negative, you can just stop there and write no solution. Here we're going to look at how we take the square roots of a fraction. It's pretty much the same thing, except you're going to take the square root of the numerator and the square root of the denominator. So first I'm going to divide each side by 4 to get my x squared by itself. So x squared equals 9 over 4. We're going to square root each side. And basically what we're doing is we're doing the square root of 9 over the square root of 4. Because it is one fraction and one number technically, even though it's written as a fraction, you only need one positive negative sign. And the square root of 9 is 3, square root of 4 is 2. So x would be positive negative 3/2. Another one with the fraction, we're going to divide each side by 25. We get x squared equaling 49 over 25. We square root both sides, which means we're basically square rooting 49, which would give us 7, and square rooting 25, which would give us 5. So far, all the answers that we've gotten have been positive. Sorry, not positive. They've been whole numbers. We haven't gotten any decimal answers yet. So here, because it says approximate, it kind of tips us off that we're probably going to get decimal answers. Unless you're specifically told otherwise, you want to round to the nearest tenths place, or one number past that decimal point. So in this first problem, I'm going to add positive 11 to each side. And I get 3x equaling 18. I'm going to divide x squared. I can divide each side by 3. So x squared equals 18 over 3, square root. And I'm going to square root that entire fraction in the calculator. So when I put it in the calculator, it's going to go square root parenthesis 18 division sign 3, and then please make sure you close off that parenthesis. When you do that, you should get x equaling positive negative 2.5. Another problem, same thing. I'm going to add positive 10 to each side. So 2x squared equals 16. Divide each side by 2. I get x squared equaling 8. Square root, square root. Square root of 8 is positive negative 2.8. So that's the end of the first part of the lesson. Basically just go to your book, page 653, if you want some more practice problems. And there's the guided practice. It's probably about 8 problems if you want additional work. If you were to go and do just the odds in the guided practice, those answers would be in the back of your book. Homework tonight's actually going to be a worksheet, which you should have in front of you. If you don't have it in front of you, you should be able to find it from the website, either the team calendar or my personal website. So now we're on to day 2 with the warm-up. Go ahead, try these 3 problems, and then we'll go over them together. So the first thing we're going to do in the first problem is we're going to divide each side by 3. So x squared equals 9. Square root each side. X equals positive negative 3. I'm going to add negative 12 to each side. We end up with p squared equaling 0. Technically, we square root each side, and p is 0. Last one, I'm going to add positive 3 to each side. When I do that, it's a squared. A squared equals negative 1. We cannot take the square root of a negative, so the answer to number 3 is no solution. So what we're going to look at today is what happens when we bring parentheses into the mix. And basically, we're just going to start and kind of work our way down until we get to the parentheses. As always, change subtraction to plus the opposite. I'm going to get rid of the 6 first. That's in front of the parentheses that's being multiplied. I'm going to divide each side by 6. And I get x plus negative 4. That is still in parentheses because it is squared. And that is going to equal 7. Before I can move the negative 4, I've got to get rid of that exponent of 2. So we're actually going to square root at this point in the problem. That brings out our parenthesis of x plus negative 4. And this is going to equal positive negative 7, square root of 7. I'm not actually going to take the square root yet because you want to wait till the very end or as far as you can until you switch it over for decimals. So now I'm going to add 4 to each side. And what that gives me is x is going to equal 4 plus the square root of 7, or x will equal 4 minus the square root of 7, because we have that positive negative sign in there. At this point, you would plug them into the calculator, and you would get 6.6 or 1.4 as your two final answers. These three are all the same. I'd like you to go ahead and try them, and then we'll go over them together. So in the first one, I'm going to divide everything by 4. If I can get my pen to work. So that gives me x plus 6 squared equaling 8. Square root each side. So x plus 6 equals positive negative square root of 8. Subtract 6 from each side. So x equals negative 6 plus the square root of 8. And negative 6 plus the square root of 8. I believe that one's going to give me the 3.2. I just have the decimals written down. And x is also going to give me negative 6 minus the square root of 8. And that one I do believe gives me the negative 8.8. Number 2, I'm going to divide each side by 2. So 10 equals m plus 5 squared. Square root each side. So m plus 5 equals positive negative square root 10. Subtract 5 from each side. So m equals negative 5 plus the square root of 10. And m equals negative 5 plus negative square root of 10, however you want to write it. And the two decimals you should end up with are negative 1.8 or negative 8.2. Last one, to get rid of the fraction, I'm going to multiply each side by the reciprocal, which is 2. So c plus negative 8 squared is going to equal 6. Square root each side. So c plus negative 8 equals positive negative root 6. Because it's a negative 8, I'm going to add positive 8 to each side. So c equals 8 plus the square root of 6, or 8 minus the square root of 6. The two answers I get there are 10.4 or 5.6. Again, because it is a shorter lesson, the remainder of the class would just be working on some problems in your textbook. Page 655, problems 3 to 40. Don't do problems 35 or 38. Technically, your homework would be in your workbook, which you don't have, but the actual homework would be to finish the practice from the previous slide. And that would be the page 655, 3 to 40.